Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm Laine Lawson Craft, here to walk with you through the ups and downs of parenting prodigals. In every episode, we're going to get real about the struggles, sharing stories of hope, and learning how faith can turn things around. So let's dive in and discover the path to healing and hope together. Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm Laine Lawson Craft, your host, and we are in the middle of a series with Nancy Landrum. Hello, Nancy.
Hi, Laine. So good to be with you today.
Yes. So listen, this is the second episode of the series. The first one was all about Nancy and how she has been through the fire and she has used her pain for purpose. And what we talked about is she had two marriages that ended in one. The first one, your first marriage, Nancy, well, really was tragic. Your husband went to a softball game to play and didn't come home. And then your second husband quickly died with cancer, and then your son Stephen, that helped you curate this book, passed away. So you have a lot of wisdom and you have a lot of experience, and today in this episode we are going to talk about, first, remind us why you wrote Pungent Boundaries.
Because it's a story that needed to be told. I learned so much from the lessons that I was forced to learn by the behavior of my son, Stephen. And there were other examples also, but primarily with Stephen. He challenged me in ways that I wouldn't wish on any parent, put me through pain that I wouldn't want anyone else to go through. But I wouldn't trade anything for the lessons I learned as a result of being Stephen's parent.
Wow. Well, I want to start with this. The reason I just love this book, because I had a lot of aha moments, because you define things differently. And I think it's because you lived through it. So I believe we need to start with codependency before we really can dig into boundaries. And so you kind of walk us through that. You define codependency as an imbalance of responsibility, meaning one person assumes too much responsibility and the other too little. Will you expand on this?
Well, as an example, when my boys were young, I hired a carpenter to build some cabinets for me in my sewing room. And he got off to a good start, and then he just stopped showing up. And I would call him and he'd promise to be there, and then he wouldn't show up. And I would nicely, be nice, because I was brought up where my Christian values equated loving with being nice. And this pattern went on for 9 months. And finally, I thought, it challenged me to redefine my definition of love. That love isn't always acting nice or being endlessly patient. I said to the carpenter, "When's the earliest that my cabinets can be completed?" And he said, "Next Wednesday." And I said, "Okay, every day after Wednesday, I will knock $20 off of the price that I owe you, the balance that I owe you." He was furious, but he showed up on Monday and finished my cabinets. And I greeted him. I was pleasant. I was nice. He was sullen and angry because I had forced him. I'd put a consequence on his irresponsibility. He'd been irresponsible for 9 months, kept ignoring me and not finishing my cabinets. And when I put a dollar amount price on what he would lose if he didn't finish, then he was angry, but I was fine.
Yes. Yes.
So,
well, that's a great example. Which responsibilities, we need to talk about, which ones belong to you and which ones belong to them. You say this, I love this. you will be clear about the responsibilities. This is fundamental and foundational for healthy self-love and love for one another.
Yes.
So give us some reference on that.
Okay. When my belief is that I have to earn love by being nice, by picking up other people's failures, by bailing somebody out when they've blown it, by continuously forgiving them, I end up feeling resentful about that relationship rather than loving. Codependence breeds resentment. And setting a healthy boundary that is taking care of my own needs, appropriate needs, not selfish kind of needs, but appropriate self-loving needs, automatically means the decision will be good for the other person as well, whether they like it or not. So as an example, one example was after Stephen became ill and as an adult came home to live with us because he wasn't well enough to work anymore. He had lots and lots of junk in the garage, and it would bleed over into my area where I needed to get to the washer and dryer. I wanted to get to some other things in the garage, and I kept nagging him, please keep your things away from the washer. And he always said, sure, Mom, glad to, but he'd forget or whatever. And so finally I took masking tape and I taped off a 3-foot sidewalk in front of the washer and dryer and in front of my workbench and paint supplies. And I showed him the masking tape and I said, Steve, if any of your stuff ends up on my side of the masking tape, I'm going to put it in the trash. And he said, okay, sure. He agreed. He understood the boundary and he understood the consequences, which is really important to healthy boundary setting. Both parties need to know the boundary and know the consequences. So a few days later, I went out to do some laundry and his motorcycle engine was on top of the washing machine. Okay, no drama, no yelling, no nagging. I just picked up the motor and put it in the trash. And it was, because the boundary was clear. And Stephen, a few days later, said, Mom, do you know where my motorcycle engine is? And I said, yes, I found it on top of the washing machine and it's now in the trash. No lectures. Children do not learn from lectures. Even adult children do not learn from lectures and nagging. They learn from a clear boundary with clear consequences. He never left anything, not one single thing, on my side of the masking tape again.
Wow. Wow. Well, as I'm looking at my notes, I really want people to see the difference in codependency and boundary setting. There's a big difference, right?
Well, they're interrelated. Codependency is a fear of setting boundaries. We're afraid to set boundaries because someone might stop loving us, or they might, disconnect from relationship with us. Or it may be a religious, erroneous religious belief that somehow being a good person of character means that you have to always forgive, always express love, always be patient. But it isn't loving to support someone else's unhealthy behavior. That isn't loving. So parents who constantly bail their kids out of jail or pay their parking tickets for them or pay speeding fines for them rather than letting them suffer the consequences of their misbehavior, that isn't loving. There's something else going on besides love, and it's usually fear. So codependency the person that is taking the heat for another person, assuming the responsibilities or the consequences for another person, is doing it out of fear.
Yes. And that's what I did, Nancy. I was so fearful that if I didn't bail them out of jail or get them out of a mess, that
Yes,
they would die, that they would maybe end up in jail for years. But what I realized, I think we talked about this off record, when I realized I was funding and supporting their slow death,
yes.
that's what I was doing. When I realized that's when I started to implement some of these types of boundaries. And I love what you say. You've got to follow through. And we'll get further into that. But I know there are a lot of people that can identify with this today. I mean, they've got kids and they're scared to death. If they don't
Yes.
bail them out, go pay the DUI off. If they don't pay the fine for the speeding, then they're going to pay a bigger consequence if they don't rescue. That's what I used to call it. I rescued my kids to a defect, really.
Well, and I made those same mistakes, Laine. That's one of that was part of the process. This whole process was from Stephen's birth until he was almost 30 years old. So 30 years of lessons. And there was time in there in the beginning of all the trouble he got into where I did rescue him because I felt sorry for him. And that's another motive for codependency or rescuing is pity, feeling sorry for a kid. Pity doesn't make good parenting decisions.
No, no. And we're going to get into that to the next episode. What I want to do, though, right now is I want you to leave us one nugget. I want to make sure that we all understand that codependency is interrelated to boundaries.
Yes.
Can you, I guess, healthy boundaries would mean you don't have any codependency interlinked, correct?
If you are establishing and following through with the consequences of healthy boundaries, then you are not acting in a codependent way at all. You're
And
you're being healthy.
yes, yes. And I want to go back to one other thing real quickly on this episode. If we don't take care of ourselves as mothers,
Yes.
if we don't do self care, we're really creating a further problem, right?
I would have been a much better mother if I had valued my own self-care more. I I was single parent for those 13 years in between my first husband and when I met Jim Landrum. And it I I did not give myself time away from my kids. There wasn't time to process parenting. I was just in the middle of doing it all the time.
Right. And that's part of our society right now. It forces us to try to be best friends and all involved in our children's lives. And again, that's just setting us up for failure, isn't it, Nancy?
Stephen told me once when he was a teenager, he said that he had learned from infancy that if he would just stand there and take my bawling him out when he had done something wrong, if he could just take my anger for a few minutes, then I would switch and bail him out of whatever problem he was in. And it was so, enlightening to hear that coming out of his mouth as about a 16 or 17-year-old kid. I thought that's exactly what I've done. I've trained him to endure my anger for a short period of time so that then he'll get the rescue that he wants.
Wow. Many of us got caught in that cycle too, Nancy, and probably some of our audience today can really relate to this. Listen, we want you to know each episode builds on the next. We don't want to leave you without some nuggets. So I think the biggest thing is codependency many times is interlinked with boundaries, setting boundaries. We must take care of ourselves. And we will go into codependency in the next segment about, I've got it here, what it is, what's its cause, what causes it, and how to determine. In the next episode, we're going to have you determine, are you in a codependent relationship? So I know that you're going to want to hear that, because Nancy, it's kind of natural, and forgive me if I'm speaking wrong. When you have a child, a disobedient child, a wayward child, or a child that's just silent with you, whether they're a teen or a young adult or adult child, codependency kind of gets set up, doesn't it?
I think codependency is set up by a set of beliefs that are not actually real. So if I believe that I'm responsible to make this child happy, or to make sure that he or she makes great decisions, and then they don't, then I take on shame and I feel sorry for my child. I'm making decisions out of pity or shame or fear. And good decisions don't come from those sources.
Wow. Wow, Nancy. Again, everybody, the book is Pungent Boundaries. Nancy Landrum is the author, and she's got so much wisdom and experience. And I just can't get over what all I learned in reading her book and really studying it. And Nancy, what's the best way, again, to get your book?
2 places. You can go to my website, nancylandrum.com, and order it from there, or you can go to Amazon and order it as a paperback or an audio version.
Well, Nancy, again, I can't believe it. We're at a different time again for a new episode. Is there anything lasting you'd like to leave on this episode?
Recovery from codependency, weeding codependency out of your relationships gives you freedom and also frees the other person to grow.
Wow. Well, in the next episode, we're going to define that, and we're going to figure out, are you codependent or in a codependent relationship? Thank you again, Nancy, for your valuable time.
You are so welcome. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining me on the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I hope you're leaving with a heart full of hope and some spiritual strategies to help your wayward child and bring your prodigal home. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and with God, everything can change. I invite you to the many free resources at LaineLawsonCraft.com. Don't forget to read the free chapter, the first chapter of my newest book, The Parent's Battle Plan, and sign up for weekly encouraging emails too. Stay in touch on social media, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Laine Lawson Craft, reminding you with love and faith, no thing is too hard or big for our God. See you next time.